The Eminence in Shadow is a light novel written by Daisuke Aizawa and illustrated by Dazai. So far it consists of 4 volumes, with its 5th volume releasing in December of this year. It also has manga adaptation illustrated by Henri Sakano consisting of 8 volumes. With its popularity, it is no surprise that at some point an anime adaptation was announced. And like all anime and manga adaptations, there's bound to be some scenes changed or completely skipped from the original material. So in this video I will talk about the missing content from the first episode of the anime. I will also compare scenes seen in the manga if possible. As a fair warning, this video will contain spoilers. It is recommended to watch the episode first and then come back to watch this video, and the same can be said about the manga adaptation. This is Ani Cut, and without further ado, let's begin. The episode begins with Akane Nishinu, a second-year student from the Sakurazaka High School. Like you see in the anime, she's quite popular with the rest of the students, except for one. This student is someone she hates the most. His name is Minoru Kaganu, and like his name implied, he was truly as obscure as a shadow. The anime doesn't go too much further, but there was a time where she didn't hate him. For her, he was just another student to greet every morning and move on, especially when his seat is right next to hers, and they came to school at the last moment before the school gates would close. It was in these morning greetings that her hatred began to grow the more she spoke with him. Specifically, with the way Minoru greeted her. Within that smile we see in the anime, there was an internal Aqua screaming it's Nishino, not Nishimura. And you might wonder, did she ever try to correct him? And the answer is that she didn't. During the first month, she left him be. She was sure that at some point he would notice and correct himself, but this sort of thing happened even after the Golden Week ended, and she thought that enough was enough. She had to correct him. And the result? Just like we see in the anime. At that time, Akane had a huge urge to punch him in the face, but she held it back in. These sort of interactions continued daily, and by the time she realized, 3 months had already passed by. Yet their interactions every day were still the same. As you can see in the light novel, the interaction we saw in the anime happens on different days rather than a single one. It was one of these days when Akane began to explain why she hated him, and the explanation we see in the anime is pretty spot on. After that, more days have passed by, but at that point, Akane had stopped caring about him. Mainly because she was trying her best to hide her true self. As you see in the next scene, she's quite popular, and there's a reason. The girl is an actress. She began when she was a child, but around middle school, she put her career on hold due to a scandal. Because of that, she decided to wear a mask against the teachers and students from her school so they wouldn't hate her. Only Minoru was the only person who was pretty close to break her persona, so that's why she made an effort to not make him hate her, but to also avoid anyone realizing how much she hated him. So let's jump to that tragic night. In the anime, her driver gets attacked by some guys. This is quite different in the light novel. It was just another normal day for Akane. Because of her job as an actress, she had to take supplementary lessons, and these would take the whole day. Because of this, she left at night. Usually she would call her driver via her cell phone, but unfortunately, it ran out of battery. With no options left, she had no choice but to walk back home. Fortunately for her, it was just a 30-minute walk, so it wasn't that difficult to do. It also helped that it was early summer, so the temperature outside was pretty comfortable for a walk. Just like we see in the anime, she tells to herself how it has been a while since she walked on her own. The last time being when she was in elementary school, when she used to take a bus. In middle school, due to the scandal, her parents decided to send her in a car each day. The thought of walking back on her own made her a bit too excited, and it was because of this exact reason that she didn't pay attention to the van that parked next to her. By the time she realized, a man jumped out and grabbed her by the neck, knocking her down in just a few seconds. The last bit she saw before fainting was the silhouette of a familiar young man running towards her. By the time she woke up, she noticed that her wrists and ankles were bound with rope, and not only that, a gag was placed in her mouth so she could not only make coherent words, her voice was muffled as well. She tried her best to scream, but to no avail. No one could hear her except for someone who realized she woke up. Here we get to see 2 guys, one who was around 190 centimeters, and another guy who was slightly smaller than the first. The biggest difference in this scene is that, in the light novel, the roles they performed in the anime were reversed. That's right, the person who reminded Akane about her previous kidnapping and tried to do things I cannot mention or else I will get my channel nuked was not the outdated gangster guy but the ex-military guy. Another difference is that in the light novel, the ex-military was a bit more rough on Akane compared to what we see in the anime. So let's jump to the moment the fancy hoodlum slayer gets into the scene. When Akane saw him, her first thought was that it was another kidnapper joining them, but soon she found out that this was not the case. Because of the reversed roles, the ex-military guy is the one who yells at the slayer demanding who he is. The slayer replies as he adjusted his ski mask. This gave enough time for the smaller guy to sneak behind him and attack, but then a strike in the jaw knocks the man out. The ex-military guy realizes that the slayer is good and let go of Akane. And then the real fight begins. Overall, despite a few changes here and there, the anime did really well with this fight scene. This includes the brutality the slayer committed to the ex-military guy. After he was sure the guy could not move anymore, the slayer whispers on how he needs to become Virgil from the Devil May Cry series. Akane then saw him extending his hand. It looked as if he was trying to get hold of the distant moon, only to shook his head the next moment and then look straight at her. Because of this, Akane began to panic. The slayer was coming closer and closer to her. Worse, he grabbed a knife that was on the floor. The girl tried to flee but still tied up. There was nowhere she could run or yell for help. By the time she'd notice, her restraints were gone. The slayer offers an advice before leaving. Akane stood there, immobile, wondering who the fancy hoodlum slayer was. His voice sounding really familiar. Let's move on to the next day. Despite the concern of her parents, Akane decided to go back to school. Thinking of her kidnapping made her afraid, but the moment the slayer came into memory, she almost broke out of her persona to burst out laughing. So like we see in the anime, she goes and meets with Kaganu once again. This time, however, he says her name right. In the light novel, this actually caught her off guard. Not only did he got her name right, she also felt that he was actually looking at her this time. But overall, his voice. Akane shook her head to ignore the sudden thoughts and goes after him. This time she wanted to give him a second chance to talk to him. Unfortunately, that chance never came. And well, I won't go any further because manga readers haven't reached to this part yet. Maybe in a few months, considering 2 chapters are released per month if I'm correct. Anyway, let's jump all the way back to volume 1. To be specific, in the prologue. And overall, the anime once again did a pretty good job here with Minoru's monologue. Okay, let's be honest, the last 4 minutes with him going full Virgil and the girls next to him are anime original. So let's go back before that scene begins, taking into account the comment of those limits. Kaganu found the answer to his question by obtaining mana, or magic. But like we see in the manga, no one has proved that mana exists, but at the same time, no one has proved that it doesn't. So he thought that with his current sanity, he would not be able to acquire magic, so he needed to go further beyond. And so he began to do a lot of things like you saw in the manga. On one night, he assumed he was starting to feel the effects of his training. He could see flashing lights going off in his mind and felt that the world was spinning. It was totally not caused by bashing his head into a tree, of course, it was real magic. His vision became blurry, a feeling similar of having a concussion. As he finished his training and proceeded to go back home, he saw 2 beams of light. And well, I don't really need to say what happened next, right? With that said, we have finally reached to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Next episode I'll continue pointing out differences between the anime and manga adaptation. I'll try to release these episodes weekly if possible. Either way, feel free to leave a like or a comment, any feedback is really appreciated. Adios.